Vigo overhead door. Bond's now in charge of that. But anyway, he was the navigator of B-17. Was shot down over Belgium. That's good, correct? Okay, and tonight he has his family here. His wife Lottie, to my right here, and looks like not quite all 9 children, but almost. Are here.
Why don't you kids stand up and be recognized?
Okay, I have son John, right that, and also their daughter Mary and Ruth. Ruth's already standing up. Their son-in-law Mike. Their grandson Kevin and Eric.
Yay.
Kevin,
There you go.
Kevin and Casey.
Eric's not here.
Okay, and also their son Richard, and their neighbor Becky Vines. Is that right? Okay. Anyway, I'll turn this over to George. It's all yours.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you very much. In preparation for coming here, I asked Lottie, how should I address the group? And she said, dear friends. So I address everybody to dear friends, but also ladies and gentlemen, because there are some ladies here. Before I get started with my experiences as far as the fateful trip over Belgium, I would like to bring to your attention that in our family, my immediate family, there were 9 children, 5 boys and 4 girls. Of those children, 6 were in the service. 4 were in World War II. I was the first to go in. My brother Bill later on, because he was the only one there to support the family. Charles was in the Navy. And Mary Ann was an Air Corps nurse. And I'll tell you a little bit about Mary Ann later on. Of course, Lottie was in the service, which is where I met her. My oldest sister, Gertrude, was married to a naval aviator, Don Hughes. He was a PBY aviator. And the 2 younger boys were in the other wars. On February the 11th, 1944, our plane was brought down by German fighters. It was a B-17. I was the navigator. The bombardier, both the bombardier and I are in the nose of the plane. You're probably familiar with that. And on our way down, I don't know who it came up front and says, George, get back. Come out of there and get back. We're going to make the crash landing. Thanks, Charlie. The plane that we were on was not our own crew. I was a volunteer navigator, and Joe Wise was a volunteer co-pilot. They didn't, for whatever reason, their navigator and co-pilot couldn't fly, and we were asked for volunteers, and I volunteered. And I've often wondered whether Joe volunteered without any hesitation, or because maybe I pressured him into, because he was married and I was single, footloose and fancy free. But anyhow, Joe volunteered, so we were on with a strange crew. And the only person on that crew was Lieutenant Courtemanche, who was the pilot. Well, for whatever reason, he broke formation. When he broke formation, we came down, and at that point, we were sitting ducks for the German fighters. I can still remember the rat-a-tat-tat of the machine gun fire across the length of the B-17. And to be honest with you, I don't think I was frightened. When things like that happen, everything happens so fast you don't have a chance to be frightened or anything else. It just happens, I assume. Anyhow, we did have a safe landing. It was a wheels-up landing in a freshly plowed field that was lightly covered with a dusting of snow. When we exited the plane was on fire, but not from the gas tanks. It was on fire from all of the outlets for the oxygen outlets. And when I exited the plane, I took what navigation papers I had and added to the fire by adding my papers, because I didn't want those exposed to the Germans. When we got out of the airplane, we were sitting ducks for the fighter pilot. And as you people probably are familiar with, he waved us off and went on. So we were there in the group. So we were instructed that if this happened to us, we should head south. So as a navigator, I directed everybody to which direction was south, but they also had compasses so they could see that, and we divided up in twos. But since there were 9, I didn't know any of these other people except the pilot, and I don't know how they separated or got together. But in my own group, it was myself, the co-pilot, and a gunner whose left hand was pierced by a shell. And he was with us, so there were 3 of us in the group. When we left the plane, the ground was very soggy. It was very hard to walk, or whatever. And so what we did was head for the first visible woods, so we could conceal ourselves. Now this was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we headed for the woods, and that's where we stayed for the rest of the daylight hours. And we were separated by so that if one of us was found, the other wouldn't be found. And so when nighttime came, and we felt it was safe to emerge from there, we left and started to walk in the direction of south. And of course, as far as the distance is concerned, we figured that we covered at least 60 miles in approximately 3 days, which was fairly good progress as far as walking was concerned in areas that you weren't familiar with. And as far as I was concerned, we must have walked in a lot of moonlight because we tried to walk mostly at night and conceal ourselves during the day. Well, the first day, the first night, of course, we were in the woods. We emerged from the woods and we began to walk. And when we came close to a town, we avoided going through the town, but around it. And the boy whose hand was injured was way behind. And I was always way out front. And I'd yell to Joe, I said, come on, you guys, get going. Well, Joe was a smoker, and he always had to stop and get a drink of water. So he's stopping and trying to get a drink of water out of a stream with the purifier that we had to purify the water. I don't know whether I ever purified the water or not. I still don't when I drink. But anyway, Joe was always stopping for water. I was very, very upset with both of them because I was way over front. But anyhow, eventually, we convinced the gunner that he would have to give himself up because he definitely had to have medical attention. And of course, when this happened, it was always a tearful experience. And so he cried, and so did the rest of us. But he did give himself up. Now, another crew member that was seriously injured was the bombardier who suffered a severe head wound, and he also apparently gave himself up, but we had lost track of him as far as our own group was concerned. So when the gunner gave himself up, there was Joe and I, we were alone. And I think it was maybe the second night that we were together, we had to cross. It seemed to me that France was full of streams, small streams everywhere. And so, on the second night that we were together, we were crossing a stream from limb to limb with trees, and I fell in. Joe didn't fall in, so I was soaked from the ground up to my waist. And the weather wasn't conducive for that. But anyway, we found some kind of a shelter that we got into that one night. There was an abandoned chicken coop, probably. And we stayed there, and then got out, at what time I don't really know, and started to walk again. And we came upon a huge farm. The barn was absolutely enormous. It was a red barn. And we thought that if we could gain entrance to the barn, we could at least get dried off and warmed up and so on. But have any of you, I'm sure you have, heard about the hedgerows in France? You know, when the Germans tried to land, the hedgerows were just formidable. And so that's what we were against as far as this particular farm was concerned. It seemed to be surrounded by hedgerows. But anyhow, somehow or another, we crawled on the ground and got through these hedgerows and got up to the barn. And in the meantime, there were a lot of geese that were right at the house, which was quite a ways, well, they were quite a ways off, probably from here to the road, and we thought sure that the geese would set up a racket, because you know, geese are really good watchdogs. So, but anyhow, they didn't set up a racket, and we gained entrance to the barn. And of course, it's pitch black, you couldn't see anything. I mean, really pitch black. And so we walked in there, feeling our way around. We could have fallen through the floor or done whatever. But anyhow, we came across an area that was probably about half as big as the room is wide and square. And it was totally full of straw. And straw, you know, is a wonderful, wonderful warmer. It's just wonderful. So we crawled into there and went to sleep. The next morning, Joe was the first one to awake, or be awakened, I guess, and the farmers were really surprised when we came. They found the two Americans sitting in there, and I'm still sound asleep, and Joe's trying to explain to those people who we are, and his French was absolutely hideous, and he had a slip of paper, I think, with what you're supposed to say, "Je suis un Américain," I am an American. And I was laughing so hard just listening to him, it was funny. But anyhow, the people, the farmers, were scared to death. They were literally scared to death. And so we asked them if they would give us clothing, because we're still in our uniforms and easily identified. They refused. But what they did do, they gave us a hot meal, and so we both had a real good hot meal, and then they told us to leave as quickly as we could, and it was quite an exposed area. And afterwards, I learned why they were so frightened, and the reason why is because in the large farms, the Germans took advantage of the situation and would impose upon the farms for eggs, chickens, or whatever they could get away with, and the farmers would comply. And that's the only alternative they had. So from that farm, we walked and walked and walked somewhere. And we came upon the farm where the farmers where we first received help. The name was Arnoux. And of course, we didn't know whether they would be friendly or whatever, but the French are excellent at making square bales. And if any of you have been on a French farm or whatever, the square bales are really precise. And they don't necessarily put them in the barn. They stack them on the outside with a wood frame, and they go way, way up in the air. So Joe and I climbed up to the top of that stack of bales of straw, and at the very top we could observe everything that was going on as far as that farm was concerned. And in a while, the workers started to come out of the farm, and the farmer himself, Mr. Arnoux, he came out, and when we saw that all of the workers had left and he was there by himself, we hollered at him, and we descended quickly, and he said, "Vite, vite, vite," which is fast, 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 and he opened the gate to where the entrance to the house was, whatever, and in we went. Now, in a French compound, and this is true whether it's large or small, they're usually made in the form of a U or a square with the gate on one end, and everything is enclosed, including the house, the barns, and so on and so forth. And I thought it was a very good arrangement, because as far as that's concerned, more or less they're very conservative. For instance, the hogs are running loose, the chickens are running loose, the sheep are running loose in a sense, but the hogs, you know, can eat almost anything. The chickens can pick up all the waste, and so the droppings from the cows and the animals, nothing's wasted. And I thought that was a very, and I bring this home. Becky, are you laughing at me? Well, when Joe and I walked into the kitchen of the Arnoux farm, it was a huge kitchen. I don't know whether it was as wide as this. It was a huge kitchen. A white marble floor. It was covered with straw. And what do you think the first thought was that came to my mind? What would my mother say? Isn't that a crazy thought, anyhow, under such circumstances? But that's what I thought. But anyhow, they had a huge round table, and around noontime, the workers came in, some of them. I don't know where all of them, some of them, they had 26 horses, so it was a huge operation. The workers came in, we all sat at a round table, and they pulled out their pocket knives, opened up the knives, set it beside their plate. I don't know exactly what we had, but anyway, the French at that time no longer had white bread, they had brown bread or dark bread, and it was the finest bread that God ever made. And that's the French. It was the finest bread. And they apologized for it, but look at the nutrients that was in that bread. And they lived on that, bread and butter and that sort of thing. And so we had bread, butter, and I assume potatoes, and I'm not sure what all. But in the corner of this room was the older lady, Madame Renou, and she was about 80, my age, I guess. Anyway, she was sitting on a stool with a galvanized bucket or tub in front of her that had pork fat cut up with blood from the pork. And blood sausage, the makings of blood sausage. Of course, I didn't know that. Joe knew that. He was from the farm, and she had the sheep casings, and she's blowing them up. And of course, I don't know how long they were, but it seemed to me they were as long as the room. When she sat there, she'd blow up the intestines, and had a funnel and put all this stuff in. And the only thing that came to my mind, I says to Joe, I says, for God's sakes, I guess in a day or two we're going to be eating that. Which was true. But at that particular moment, when we sat down at the table, we had some glasses like that, about that high, and it was hard cider. Now, I didn't know anything about hard cider at that time, or any alcoholic drink. So I took mine, and Joe's on my right, and I said, Joe, I says, I think you better drink this. I says, it's going to make me sick. So he goes like a big baby, drink it. So I drank like that, swish. It was no sooner emptied than it was filled up again. I had another glass of hard cider, which I drank. And as my wife will tell you, I've become accustomed, and I like hard cider. See the benefits, Mother, of being shot down? Well, we stayed at the Arnoux farm for 10 days. Now, the people at the Arnoux farm were not associated with the French underground. And it was a large farm. And we were in a bedroom with 3 people in it. Myself, Joe, and one of the workers. And I never got any rest until the worker left, which was about 4 o'clock in the morning, because my legs were right over the edge of the bed, and it was terribly painful. But after that, then I got some sleep, and Madame Arnoux, who was 80 years old, she'd come flying in the morning, open up the curtains, bring in the bread and the butter and the cider, full of energy and full of smiles and very friendly. And that was a great experience as far as that farm was concerned. But considering the fact that they were a large farm and subject to the same thing that this other large farm was concerned, apparently the French underground felt that it was dangerous for us to stay there. We were there for 10 days. Now those people tried to make carte d'identité for us, which means a card of identification, which is like your driver's license. And they weren't professional. So anyhow, they moved us from there to the Madame Marley's little residence, and she and her husband had a small place. Madame Marley was a feisty woman, and her husband was scared to death, probably like I'd be. But then he was scared. He was a former Ford agency dealer, and she, at this point, to earn a living, was a fortune teller. And Madame Marley, she was a great lady. They had 3 rooms in their house. The living room, the kitchen, I think maybe the kitchen came first and much, and the bedroom. The bedroom had 2 double beds. And the beds were about this far apart. Double bed here and double bed there. So we got this double bed, Joe and I, and Madame Marley and her husband got this double bed. And one day, Madame Marley was extremely happy. And I said, Madame, I says, pourquoi? Pourquoi vous êtes heureuse, happy? She said, and I don't know how to say it in French, because This is the first time my husband has been forced to sleep with me for years. And another thing was, I have asked myself 1,000 times over, would we in this country give up your own bedroom to two perfect strange men? And my answer is always negative. I can't imagine it. Nor can I imagine the fact in Great Britain, the discipline they had in Great Britain with the drapes, with not one speck of light showing for the German bombers at night. It was incredible, absolutely incredible. And another thing that was incredible as far as England was concerned, the taxi drivers. The fellow the pilot of my own plane, his name was John Corcoran, came from New York, and he was a New Yorker through and through. He was 23 years old, never had a driver's license, but he sure could fly a B-17. And we go to London, and he'd stand on the curb, and if any of you have ever been to London in the fog, you can't see yourself. You have to hold hands. And we stand out on the curb, and he'd say, "Taxi!" And I said, "John, you're out of your mind. There'll never be a taxi here." In 2 seconds, there's a taxi. He was incredible. He was accustomed, I guess, to big city living. But anyway, relative to the Madame Marley farm, she was a fortune teller. The house was separated by the outhouse from about this wall to this wall, and there were a bunch of chairs there, and all of her people that came to her to have their fortunes told were girls. And so the outhouse is over there. And there's about this much room between the outhouse and the floor. And Monsieur Marley used to always make fun of me. He says, "George, when those girls are here," he says, "you're over there with your head stuck underneath the door." Well, Madame Marley was quite feisty. She was a great lady. And one time we shaved outside, and how in the world we had old Gillette razor blades and so on that were dollars ever, but anyhow we managed to shave, and she had the French were excellent cooks. I mean, excellent. And of course, a good bit of their diet was domestic rabbits. But she had a wild rabbit hanging right there in front of us where we're shaving, and it's up a little bit ways. It's in April, and the weather's kind of warm, and that rabbit had a wire around its neck. Wasn't disemboweled at all, was just hanging there. And I said, "Madame," I said, "it's about time when we eat that rabbit." She said, "It's not ready yet." Not ready yet. I think that went on for about 10 days. Not ready yet. But when it was ready, we had that rabbit, and it was delicious. Absolutely delicious. I couldn't believe it. After that, we went to, the French underground would move you if they had a thought that there might be a danger, or if it was time to move to somewhere else. From Madame Marley's, we went to a farm by the name of Leleu. The man's name was Leleu, and that was at the top of a mountain. Pretty good. I can't think of the name of the place. Coucy-le-Château. Coucy-le-Château. That's it. I got it written down here. They had a grocery store. And the mother was a tall, rather heavy-set woman. They had 2 children. And so we stayed there for a while, and at that point, in that particular location, that was the first time we had a chance to bathe since we were shot down. And so at that point, it was when I saw that I had taken a lot of pellets from whatever, because my winter underwear was full of holes in the sleeves and in the thighs. And that was rather interesting, but you could see the red spots and the holes in the winter underwear and the arms and in the thighs. Well, we got a bath there. How long we were there, I don't really know. But there was a family up there whose name was Gautier. And Mr. Gautier was rather bold in a sense, and the people were kind of afraid because they thought that he might cause trouble from standing up for the Germans. And in a sense, it did cost him his life, because he was not too far from the Leleu residence where we were, And the Germans came by one time, and he and his elder son tried to escape, and they went down around the back, and all of the French residences more or less have a gate around them, no matter how big or large or small, they have a gate around them with a fence. And apparently he tried to escape, and he was gunned down, and so was his son, his oldest son. And his wife was taken prisoner. And when we came back to that residence in 1973, our oldest son George and I, we went to visit them, and Madame Gautier was there. We have a picture of her here. Monsieur Leloup said she was elle est formidable, and in English you can understand she was formidable. She didn't give the Germans any information about us or anybody else. And when she came back, she was just dressed in a burlap bag. And we have a picture of her somewhere here. From there we went to another place, Monsieur le Roi, and that means the king. And when we went to his place, he had, excuse me, one daughter whose name was Noella. Were there any other daughters that I mentioned as far as she was concerned? I can't remember. But at that time, Monsieur le Roi, when he walked, he was just like this. He could scarcely walk. He was a big man. He took us into his barn. He had a relatively new French car. What are some of the famous French cars? I can't remember. What?
Peugeot.
Not Peugeot.
Citroen.
No.
Renault.
Renault, yeah, he had one. And he showed us that car, and there was a wheel here, something else there, something else there. The car was totally dismantled because he said if the Germans came by and found that car in one piece, it would be gone. And I'm assuming that was true. He had a pen there with pigs. The only feed the pigs got was human excrement or whatever. They had no feed or whatever as far as that's concerned. But anyway, he was scared to death to have us in his home. So they had a very large pasture. It was quite large. And they armed Joe and I with picks and shovels to a woods. And so Joe and I went out and dug ourselves a shelter in the woods. Joe was very upset about this. To me, it was an adventure. It didn't seem to me that anything upset me in those days. I was just grateful to be alive. But anyhow, we went out and dug this cave, and it was big. I could stand up in it. It had several bales of straw that we could sleep on, and it was fairly well concealed from the top. And since we were in the woods, and we were beginning at that point, the beginning of the time when we were beginning to supply fighter planes to help with the bombing and everything, we had a grandstand seat for the best 4th of July works you ever saw in your life. Over there, up in the air, and it was incredible. Every day, the fighter planes, P-38s, German planes, going down, going up, going everywhere. That was an interesting experience. But I want to point out to you the dedication that the French people had for us. They had a young daughter whose name was Noella Code. I suspect she was about 12 years old. And as a pretense, they had cows. I don't know, really one or two. I don't think it was more than two, but I'm not really sure. That she would go out to milk in the morning and in the evening. And when she went out to milk, she carried the food for us in the morning and carried food for us in the evening. So we were fed twice a day. And that was as good as eating it as is right here. Bar none. And you know the kind of containers that a farmer or miners used to take or whatever to carry their food in? That's what they had over there. I'm not familiar with that here, but anyhow, that was great. Well, from that, at that point, we were separated. From that point on, Joe and I were separated. And I was taken to the Peltier farm, and they had 3 children. Her oldest son was killed in an airplane at the beginning of the war. And she had a younger son whose name was Robert. Robert was rather careless in a sense. And a daughter whose name was Janine. Well, anyway, they were elderly people, very poor. And so I was there alone, and Joe, where Joe was, I don't know, I didn't see him. I saw him after that, but I didn't know which family he was with. But anywhere, at the Peltier residence, at that place, I was never so frightened in all my life. Because a contingency of Germans pulled up in the beginning of the evening when it was dark. In my bedroom, fortunately, I could see out front. And they pulled up and parked and so on. And I got up and woke up Madame Peltier and his wife. They immediately pushed their bed aside, pulled aside a carpet, opened up a trap door. I jumped down, they threw in a mattress, they covered everything up, and Madame occupied the bed that I had left because it would be warm. And talk about being frightened, I was really frightened. At that point, I was frightened more than at any time during the war. I was really frightened. And if they had found me, I would have been taken prisoner. They would have been shot, and the whole neighborhood would have been subject to a search. And when you ask yourself, how did the Germans go cover such a large area with so few people in a city and control them, it was because the minute something happened, they'd take 10 men out of the village, shoot them. That was the end. And so there was no chance for even if the Germans weren't there. If they got wind of this, that was the end. So many adult men. Just that fast. And one of the men came back, and I can't think, who was taken, not a prisoner, but who was, yeah, he was taken by the Germans, but put in for slavery. He came back and he was showing me how much his belt had taken in and the weight he had lost in that experience. It was from the Madame Peltier farm that the Americans were coming through from Paris. And so it was at that point that we left. Now, as far as Joe Wise is concerned, I had lost all contact with Joe. I don't know when he left. But of course, that was a tearful separation when we all left. We did leave. And I was about 80 miles north of Paris. And to get to Paris, you had to walk or hitchhike. Well, I was telling Colonel Stevenson here, perhaps, that I gained a tremendous amount of respect for the enlisted men, the sergeants, the captains, and so on. They were incredible, and they were all business. They didn't have a thing to do with us. You find your way into Paris the best way you can. They were on the march, coming up from Paris, and of course, we were about 80 miles north of Paris, and so we walked and thumbed rides. I walked alone, thumb rides and whatever, till I got to Paris. And my first night in Paris, I slept on the sidewalks of Paris. And it wasn't exactly warm, it was in the fall. But anyway, I found my way to the hotel where they were processing downed airmen. And they were overwhelmed. They hadn't the faintest idea that so many downed airmen were still alive and able to make their way back. So that, in a sense, is how this journey ended, except when I was in Paris, I wanted to make a phone call to London, probably to get in touch with my mother, I'm not sure, but anyhow, I told, and mind you, to make a phone call was like gold. The operator said to me from London, "What is your name?" I said, "Schmalzried." She says, "You have a sister here in London." And that was Mary Ann, who was a nurse. And so we arranged a meeting between Mary Ann and myself at Paddington Station. And I don't know how long we were together, but for a while. And Mary was wearing an Eisenhower jacket. Now, are you fellows familiar with how Eisenhower shortened the jackets? And a short skirt. And I said to Mary, "You haven't changed a bit." Because as a youth, you know, she was a jitterbugger. So we had a fine get-together, and at that point we had to part. And then I went back to our base at Crafton Underwood, about 50 miles north of London, and I was never, ever so disappointed in all my life. I saw no one of my original crew, no one that I knew. I didn't even know the area. And one thing that I want, and they had gone through my possessions, you know, whatever, your footlocker, whatever you want to call it, it was ransacked, which wasn't too important, but in a sense, what I really wanted was my sextant for taking readings as far as your position from stars and whatever. I was good at that. And the fellow who was there tried to accommodate me, and so he took me into a room about a fifth the size of this room, and he says, well, George, where's your sextant? It was solid sextants. I was about ready to die. So, but he accommodated me and he gave me one. And I still have it, and I just looked at it the other day. You know where it is in the bottom drawer of the dresser where all these pictures were. But I couldn't use it today if I wanted to. So the most disappointing thing of all this was going back to the base, not finding one person that I knew. And then from that point on, I flew home. And I went to Atlantic City. In Atlantic City, I went on home. And I can't remember whether I went back to Atlantic City or whatever, but eventually I landed up somewhere in the south of Mississippi. And then I was hooked up with another person from wherever we were sent to. Oh, Stu Comer. Stu Comer, he was another navigator. And the two of us were sent to Alamogordo, New Mexico. And when an officer reports in, he reports into the base adjutant. The base adjutant in this particular case was in the hospital. And the base adjutant's secretary, Grandpa, is the one I reported to.
And the first thing he said, this is a God-forsaken place. And I said, oh, you like it after a while.
9 months later, we were married. But the person that caused me an awful lot of, do you have a picture of Colonel Logan here, where he's pinning on the Purple Heart? Colonel Logan wanted to separate us. He wanted to send me, I don't know where to, God forbid, he wanted to send me anywhere to get me away from Watt. He didn't. He was bound and determined, but you know who interceded for us? Was the Catholic priest, Father Fagan. He was a little guy, chubby little guy. He had a car. See, and Lottie and I are recording, and so he loaned us his car. It was a four-door Studebaker. Anyhow, Father Fagan used to fry me too because he was a little short, stocky guy, and we did a lot of things together. We did a lot of things together, like play tennis and swim. He'd always beat me. No matter what we were doing in sports, he'd beat me. And we did go together, Father Fagan and I. We spent 3 days with the Grand Canyon in Arizona together. We had a lot of fun together. So that's sort of the story, in a sense, of my military life. Lottie and I got married. My mother was terribly upset. I don't know what your mother was dead then, wasn't she? No, she was alive, right? But anyhow,
Well, you can tell them that you were at the base to be train the navigators for the B-29.
yeah.
And that's why you were there.
I forgot about all that. Yeah, I was assigned to Alabama, New Mexico as a flight navigator. And the person who went with me, Stu Komarov, was also a flight navigator instructor. Stu got into trouble exiting a plane and pulled his parachute too soon and killed himself. And so of the two of us, I was the one who survived. And I got a wonderful life.
Well, one of the first things that happened is I could spell Schmalzried. You know, nobody knew how to spell Schmalzried, but I could spell it because I had a friend by that same name way back in Michigan. See, he's from Pennsylvania. And that was one thing that kept us, you know, he appreciated that. But we were only, I mean, I was the secretary for base adjutant, and he didn't want me to leave. And of course, they wanted George in the training department, So they couldn't ship either one of us out, so we were able to stay together.
One of the last things that I, as a flight navigator, one of the last things that I did, which was rather frightening for me, the pilots of the B-29s, when they came back, they had an expression of having those airplanes on the step, which meant that they were flying at the perfect altitude and for the longest distances and for the consuming the least amount of fuel. And so one of the last missions that I scheduled for the B-29s to fly was from Alamogordo, New Mexico to Florida and back again. And I was never so frightened in my life because, in a sense, relative to that, because the planes were late coming in. And was Captain Gio, wasn't he my superior, Captain Gio? He and I were up half the night waiting for those planes to come in, wondering whether or not they'd make it and not run out of fuel. But they all got back safe. Well, that's the story of my military life. Go
Do you
ahead.
ever find out what happened to the two comrades of yours, one with the head wound and the hand wound, whatever happened to them, that had to give themselves up?
The only thing that I know is everyone got back safe.
Including those two?
Yes, all of them got back safe. Now, whether they obviously were probably prisoners of the Germans for a period. But the only thing, I never saw anybody after that I knew. Didn't see them, didn't see any members of my own crew. And as I mentioned before, that was the most disappointing thing. But no, I never saw them. I never saw any of the people after that. And it was very distressful as far as I was concerned, because I was looking so forward to seeing these people. But I
You
didn't.
mean you've never had a reunion since then?
No.
What squadron were you in?
Pardon me?
What squadron were you in?
Was 384th?
No, that's the group.
Yeah. What squadron? I
What
don't know.
squadron were you in?
I don't know.
I was in the
384th bomb,
546.
384th bomb group, but Grafton Underwood.
Yeah. There were 3 squadrons there,
Names of them.
546, 547, and 548.
He was there.
You were there.
Yeah.
Where were you stationed?
Grafton Underwood.
Oh, were you really? That's interesting. I don't know what squadron I was in. I can't answer that.
It's amazing.
I'll have to look it up in that book. I have a book on the 384th bomb group. Do you have one? I have a book.
No.
I have one.
He has one.
Smith was the colonel,
Yeah.
commander.
General Smith.
Yeah, General Smith. I have a book on that. There's a short, or whatever, writing about Grafton Underwood.
Well, the next
What-
reunions in down south.
Is it?
Yeah.
At what time were you there?
I was there from May 44 to December 44.
It's May 14th to December. See, I was, in a sense, I was out of it completely
Yeah.
then. Mhm.
How long did that trip take you to get back to Paris from the time you were shot down?
He got back to Paris the first part of September. He was shot down in February, and he got-
No, it was in October that I got back to Paris. No, it was September. The French people, I think, are just,
Do you remember where you crossed from Belgium into France?
Wayne, not really. I could see, I have my maps. I found, they're escape maps, as we call them, they're cloth.
I'd like to see
Saint-Quentin, is Saint-Quentin familiar to you?
Pardon?
Saint-Quentin, San Quentin.
Oh, yeah, oh, yes.
Well, see, San Quentin was the area where these people were, more or less. So we were above San Quentin, I always say that.
We're talking more about that.
Now, I had my sister was engaged to marry a paratrooper. His name was Steph. Do you remember? I can't remember his name, but I saw a picture of Steph. He was a Polish person. And I have a picture of her and him. They were engaged to be married. But she didn't know it at that time, but he was killed in a parachute drop at the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh,
It nearly destroyed her. She was so upset.
One second, she wants to film.
She went on, go ahead.
Wayne McClellan is here, and he was a B-17
That's better.
pilot, and he was POW. Wayne, were you anywhere near it?
Okay.
No.
Were you a POW? What kind of treatment did you get?
Terrible.
Terrible. I think if they'd caught me, I'd have died.
Yeah, you wanna mention when you went back with George to visit these folks, and they
I have one.
recognized one another across the street?
Richard is bringing up a question. My son was in Germany, and when he, this was during the Vietnam War, when he was discharged, I went over to join him. And we were there for 3 or 4 weeks, I guess. And we went to see a lot of these French people. And you asked me, did they know us? Really did, and they were very, very, very happy to see us. Really, very, very happy. You really got a warm welcome. Really did. They couldn't do enough for you, even then.
You were walking on the opposite side of the street on separate sidewalks, and you recognized one another after how many years of not seeing each other?
Well,
19 years or something?
How many years was it? 1973 to 19
45.
20, 30.
44.
28 years. Almost 30 years.
The disappointing thing was is that so many of these people were deceased. And the Marley family, the husband is deceased, and the mom was still alive, but she had her home barricaded. You couldn't find your way in, so to speak. And George and I, we forced our way in. She was very upset. Then after she mellowed up, we had a good meeting and had a lot of remembrances to make.
But as a young man, I remember you having the grandchildren of a lot of these people over to our farm during the
That's
summer.
correct, that's correct, that's
A lot
correct.
of
Some of the
these
children were there. Who all was there, Mother? Frank Arnoux was there. Who all was? Madame Frédérique Code was there. Frédérique Code was the daughter of Noella. Noella was the girl who milked the cows. Frédérique, you took her to Niagara Falls in the Colton. Remember? You remember that?
Yeah.
She was a big girl. Now she's still corresponding with George, but she lives in the southern part of France, so he doesn't see her. But where's the picture of Madame Bonnard? Madame Bonnard was a
Fall picture.
Madame and Roger. He's deceased. Madame Bonnard is still alive, and she kept my insulated flight jacket and gave it back to us when George and I went over there. So she had that for all these years. And when I went back, she had that flight jacket that she gave to us. You know, the insulated flight jacket, leather jacket.
We have.
Very interesting that when you came back, walking into Paris, that nobody paid much attention to you, just
They didn't.
walking in.
Wayne, they didn't pay any attention to us. When I went into Paris, it was all afire. Everything was burning. The buildings were burning.
In Paris?
Yes, in Paris. So you can see how recent the fighting was. The horses, you know, all draft horses. There were dead draft horses all over the place.
On the way into Paris?
Yes.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, on the way into Paris. Yeah, and of course, the people. I don't know whether they weren't exactly what you might call unfriendly, but they were probably reticent to make friends with somebody they didn't know. All I can remember was I slept on the sidewalk the first night and finally found my way to the hotel.
Now, when did you come back, did you finally get into Paris?
I think it was early in September.
Paris was liberated in the last of August of
It
44.
had to be early in September then, because it was just liberated.
George, did you have your uniform on all this time?
No. No, that's, maybe I didn't mention that. At the Arnoux family, the first family we were at, they supplied us with the civilian clothes. And they also tried to make up carte d'identité, cards of identification. And my name in French was Louis Lalonde, which is tall. And Joe's name was René Petit, and he was short. So his name in French was René Petit, and my name was Louis Lalonde on my French identification card. Now what I did with those, what happened with all these things is when I came home, my brothers and sisters and everybody wanted, and I gave them to these, I don't know, I gave them, so I don't have my Purple Heart. I don't know what happened to it. I visited Charles before he died. When did Charles die, Mother?
97.
And he had my maps, the cloth maps. escape maps, as we call them. We kept them in our knees. And we had our, so I have those, but I don't have my,
Purple heart.
Purple Heart. I
You
don't
got,
have
you
that.
got that replaced.
What's
Just as
that?
long as you
Get that
have a red
replaced.
heart.
You got that replaced.
Can I
That'll
get,
be in the wounds, I mean,
can I get that replaced? I'll have to, go ahead, Michael.
Did you say that you still have that flight jacket?
Yeah,
Yep.
we do have it, Mike.
Do you?
Yeah.
Have what?
Flight jacket?
A flight jacket.
Flight
Oh, I have it, Mike. It's upstairs in the room between the two bathrooms.
So I am allowed to look at it?
Yeah, I still have mine.
Your comment about the French area, the house and the barns and all. During the Battle of the Bulge, we thought we were going to be in winter quarters over here with Luxembourg. And we had winterized tents until December 16th. And then there's straight, we got out of those in a hurry, but they stuck us into whatever buildings we could get. And there's a French farmhouse nearby, and 3 of us were put on the 2nd floor. No windows, of course, that they all blown out. And there's a very, very heavy stone walls. Over us on the 3rd floor were the chickens. Right up in the back of us is where the cows were. And there no windows or there's no glass. We got that all night. And then when it warmed up out front, the manure piles came in the other windows, and those have been in France know what that's like. And for about 2 or 3 weeks, we always wish we were up in wood someplace, but that was the safest place to be because the Germans kept going up and down the street. And one night, one of my fellow officers went out with a can to get some water, and he got out just in time that one of the bedtime Charlies were coming down. And the funny thing was that he heard him come, he had this water can, and he just filled it. Tom pumped, came back, and the Jerry's were screaming. He threw the can one way and dived into the church, which is right there in the front. And we always joked with him afterwards, because that's the first time he'd ever gone into the church under direction. But that setup, but people don't know, and in Belgium was the same way in many places. They put the menorah up in front on the street side because it was so valuable. And it was pretty rancid in the spring. But I can picture that situation you were talking about.
Well, you have to take your hat off to these European people. You really do. And to the British. Their discipline is incredible. Just incredible. Does anybody else?
Yeah, how'd you get started in the military? Did you,
How'd I get-
what year, did you go in and stuff?
Well, it was fairly early. I was of course eligible for the draft. And a high school, a friend came to me, and he had gone into the Air Corps. And he came to me and he says, "George, you should try out for the Air Corps." And so I took that under advisement and went to see about it. And in order to qualify it as an Air Corps cadet, you had to have 2 years of college or the equivalency thereof. And so I had to pass an examination to be accepted. And I studied for approximately, I was regrouping, I was in business for myself. It seems like I've been in business for myself most of my life, but I was regrouping tires for the automobile dealers in Pittsburgh during the day, and at night I'd study. And all I can remember was, I studied for 3 months, and one of my eyes was just bead red like a beet, it was just oozing and everything, and it was under those circumstances that I took that test. And whether I could see out of that eye or not, I don't know, or which eye it was, but anyhow, I passed. By the grace of God, I passed. They didn't give you this, how much you passed by, but I passed, that was all that was necessary. And so shortly thereafter, why then I began to move out. When did I go, September? I don't know when it was. I know my father took me down to the station, and he was crying his eyes out. But anyway, he died while I was in the service. I was 2 weeks from graduating from Selman Field of the navigation school, and his dad died. When was that letter he had sent me? About 2 weeks or 4 days before he died.
He sent
4
you a
days
letter.
before he died. Said he was doing great. And he died. I had a great father. There were 9 children in our family, and there was no money. And of course, in a sense, I think that was a blessing because all of the older children worked. I've been working. When I was in the 6th grade, I was delivering groceries for the A&PT company. And my brother Bill was delivering newspapers, and we were working constantly from that time on. And I think that work is was my only salvation because I was kind of a troublemaker. If I hadn't been working, I'd have been in jail probably. But so I worked, and I'll never forget one time. I had to be at the A&P or when I left school about 4 o'clock, and I had a wagon. And one day, I was in the 6th grade, and I can't, Sister, what was her name? Sister Canise, I think, the Catholic school. She kept me after school for doing something bad, whatever it was. And I couldn't stand it for more than 4 or 5 minutes sitting at the desk, and I got up and bolted and ran out of the school, down to the schoolyard, and our yard was across the cemetery. From the schoolyard, it was the cemetery, into our yard, and she sent a guy after me that was about 10 feet higher than I was. And I can't think of his name, but he caught me at the entering our yard of our home. And of course, I let out a yell, and my mother came out and told him to leave me alone, and I went on to work. But the next day, my father had to get me back into St. Bernard's. And I think that happens about every year, 3 or 4 times. I had to have my father get me back into St. Bernard's. But anyway, work. I have told all of these children, work is the only thing that makes leisure meaningful. I don't care what else it is, but work. I know when I worked at the A&P and the holidays came up, my God, how we enjoyed it. You know, whether it was Christmas, Easter, whatever, how we enjoyed it. And when we did work, we just put on displays, counter displays, floor displays, the shelves, and you worked, the store closed at 9 o'clock Saturday night, you worked maybe until 1 or 2 o'clock Sunday morning. You didn't get paid 1 nickel for that, but you enjoyed it because there was a certain amount of camaraderie there that positively is not in existence today anywhere. Anywhere. We had the greatest fun in the world. And when a person was able to purchase a new car, in those days, Mr. Lemon was the manager, and he had purchased a 1932 or 33 Oldsmobile 4-door sedan. My God, you'd have thought you were riding a Rolls Royce. And one of the workers, Phil, I can't think of the brothers, they had purchased a new Plymouth a year or so later. And after work, you know, we'd go out riding in those cars in the summer and the warm air, and my God in heaven, you were like being in heaven. And that's the truth. You enjoyed the leisure so much, in spite of the fact, and my dad used to always meet me at the foot of our stairs. I'm coming home with a wagon, and he'd help me put the wagon away. It was in the stairs beside going up into the house. It was inside the house. He'd help me put the wagon away. And the manager of the store, Mr. Lemon, Wade Lemon, he knew the situation of our family and all the children. We had nothing. And so I got all the leftover bread. I got whatever chickens they were going to throw out. Jack Schmalzried was the butcher. He'd send me home with whatever chickens there were. And we didn't even have a refrigeration at that time except ice. And my mother was a marvel at parboiling that food, whatever, so it wouldn't spoil. So I got bread and whatever else there was every week. It was an incredible experience. And the work ethic is what the children today just do not understand. They don't understand it at all. And I think it's very important. Whether or not you're from a wealthy family or a poor family, the work ethic is very, very important. Any other questions? I'll answer any and all questions you might have if I can.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna draw 50-50 here.
Do we want to pass that?
Okay, we got $30 in the 50-50. That means you get 5 and we get the rest.
That sounds like a good deal.
72-34 is the last 4 numbers.
Dad got it.
Somebody got it.
The wine barrel's coming around.
The wine barrel? Okay.
Pass this $2 down.
Well, I've been here 20 years. I got here in 1980.
Well, when did they start this?
I don't know, but I was here one of the first ones.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, we do sound as well as me.
I'll be right with you.
All right, guys, let's go. Where we gotta get going?
Mom, you need help carrying something?
I'm just gonna carry it. Well, that's all. They don't.
Small problem, same outfit.
Because I like.
Take that stuff down there.